Hi there, and welcome to Question Period on this Sunday, January 25th. I'm Vassy Kapelos. Today, Trump's at it again.
We have to keep the focus on protecting Canadians, protecting our communities, protecting our borders, protecting our way of life.
The U.S. president threatens new tariffs against Canada and for the first time calls this prime minister, quote, governor. Why? He says it's all about China, though it comes on the heels of a notable speech the prime minister delivered in Davos this week.
Great powers have begun using economic integration as weapons. Tariffs as leverage, financial infrastructure as coercion, supply chains as vulnerabilities to be exploited.
So, where does the relationship go from here? Manitoba Premier Wab Kinew is here. Then the Sunday strategy session with Kathleen Monk, James Moore, and Reid will weigh in. And former Australian Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull breaks down Carney's Davos moment. Then, Tory test. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre faces the biggest hurdle yet to his leadership. Party faithful will decide his future later this week in Calgary. How will Poilievre fare? Pollsters Shachi, Kurl, and David Coletto will tackle that. We're going to start today with the U.S. president's latest threat against Canada. In a social media post this weekend, Donald Trump wrote, quote, "If Governor Carney thinks he is going to make Canada a drop-off port for China to send goods and products into the United States, he is sorely mistaken," before going on to write, "If Canada makes a deal with China, it will immediately be hit with a 100% tariff against all Canadian goods and products coming into the USA." The White House has provided no details about when or how those tariffs would be levied since that post. This morning, Prime Minister Mark Carney was asked to respond to Trump's latest threat on his way into Liberal caucus on Parliament Hill here in Ottawa. Have a listen.
We have commitments under CUSMA that not to pursue free trade agreements with non-market economies without prior notification. We have no intention of doing that with China or any other non-market economy. What we've done with China is to rectify some issues that developed in the last couple of years.
Have you spoken to Donald Trump? This latest threat from Trump is garnering a lot of reaction here in Ottawa and across the country. For more on that, I'm joined now by CTV senior political correspondent Mike Couture. Mike, let's talk a little bit about what we just heard from the Prime Minister, really his first statement since that, to reporters since that initial speech in Davos, which we'll talk about later on in the show. Really an attempt there to say, hey, this thing with China is not as big as Trump seems to now be characterizing it, though I think it's fair to point out Trump a few days ago didn't think it was a big deal.
Yeah, and to your point, Trump had said, yeah, it's good for Mark Carney and for Canada to go and make a deal with China, and obviously now that has changed. And it's interesting, I don't think it's tailoring the message, but certainly the Prime Minister and the Canadian government is making some alterations to it right now, because it was back in Beijing, sitting across the table from President Xi, that Prime Minister Carney said that this progress that we've made in the partnership sets up well for the new world order. And then he repeated that in Davos, talking about different worlds and the middle powers having to come together, and now sort of minimizing what was happening, saying we're resetting the relationship with China. And even in that clip that he was speaking to reporters, saying, look, this is essentially going back to the future and making sure that things return to the way they were before the trade war with China. Certainly this government is trying to, as much as they can, reframe what we are seeing there and what and how Donald Trump has reacted to it. Because up until this point, Vassy, this was a full steam ahead. We are very happy with what's going on in China, the Canadian government is, and painting it as something very positive. And to the point that he had made, there is an article in COSMA, it's Article 3210, about non-market countries and making a free trade agreement with them. And it does say that you need at least 3 months notice prior to commencing any kind of negotiations on a new free trade agreement with a non-market country such as China. And in point 5 says entry by a party into a free trade agreement with a non-market country will allow the other parties to terminate the agreement on 6 months' notice. The President of the United States has not given any type of notice, to the point that you had made. We're not hearing anything else from the White House other than this threat of 100% tariffs. And we know with President Donald Trump, there are threats. And as Derek Burney, former ambassador, had said on Friday, it's sometimes talk out. Trump always chickens out.
Yeah, certainly with the last sort of 10% tariffs in a response to Doug Ford's ad, that Reagan ad, that has never materialized.
Right.
So we'll keep our eyes peeled. Thanks a lot, Mike. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Shachi.
Our senior political correspondent here at CTV News, Mike LeCouture. Pardon me. To get some provincial reaction, we are joined live right now by Manitoba Premier Wab Kinew. Hi, Premier Kinew. It's good to see you again. Thank you very much for making the time.
Thanks for having me back.
I wanted to start off just with that last line of the tweet and get your instinctive reaction. If Canada makes a deal with China, it will immediately be hit with a 100% tariff, Donald Trump writes, against all Canadian goods and products coming into the United States. How do you respond, Premier? And do you think he's actually going to follow through on it?
Donald Trump? You know, if you and I want to play a game trying to predict what Donald Trump is going to do, I don't know if any of us are going to come out the other side of that as winners. But what I would say is that this is the reality that Canada is in. And I hope Canadians are buckled up and ready for the ride, because we have to be able to do negotiations and deal making with China here in Western Canada for the entirety of the past little while. We've been dealing with real life economic impacts to canola, to pork, because of the tariffs and the threat of more from China. And then at the same time, we got to balance all of that with what's going on in the United States. And at the same time, not just look at the economics of the situation, but we also have to be able to speak with moral clarity when we see outrageous things like what we're seeing in Minnesota right now, just south of us, or equally on the other side of the world, infringing on human rights that the Chinese Communist Party might be engaged in on a given day. So it's a very complicated equation that I think Canada has to try and solve for. It's a really delicate balancing act, but the importance is unity. We have to stick together across the different regions of the country, across the different sectors of the economy, dealing with these superpowers. The only way we have a chance is if we stick together within Canada.
I have a number of questions on what that means from an economic perspective, but you did mention Minneapolis, and of course Minnesota is a neighbor to Manitoba. I think there are a lot, this is a huge deal to us, this tweet, this post in Canada, but that the second time an ICE agent has killed somebody in Minneapolis is a huge story that I think has gripped a lot of people in this country as well. It's very difficult to process what we're watching. And I'm just wondering if I could pick up on your point there and ask you, as you watch that unfold, what is going through your mind? What is the moral clarity that you talked about?
Well, what is happening in Minnesota is outrageous. And I reached out and had a back and forth with Governor Walz yesterday just to offer support and let him know how that looks for us. We just want the thing to get ratcheted down there. This is one of our neighboring states. This is an important trading partner. We have big Manitoba businesses with a lot of operations in Minnesota. Let's get back to normal. Let's get back to an America, not just as a reliable trading partner, but an America that doesn't have military operations being carried out in large, important cities. Again, I think that Canada has to speak with moral clarity right now. We all want to have good business relations with the U.S. We all want to have good business relations with the rest of the world. But we also have to do that while being proud of the flag. We also have to be proud of who we are as the Canadian peacekeepers that we have been over the years. We also have to be that beacon for human rights, especially at a time when global powers are taking a step back from being the champions of human rights. So I know there's going to be a lot of business voices across the country saying just, keep your head down and do a deal at all costs. But I think the average Canadian knows that we want more than just business as usual. Yes, we want strong economic relations. Yes, we want strong economic ties. But we also want to be able to look ourselves in the mirror at the end of the day.
Do you think, given what we're seeing from Trump, that what you just described is possible? Because I think what you're saying reflects how most Canadians feel, right? Like they're watching a lot of this stuff with outrage, and at the same time, they're worried about putting food on the table and what, for example, this 100% tariff or the removal of USMCA would mean more largely for the economy and for their own jobs. Like what you describe, do you really think it's possible?
It's essential. Not only is it possible, it's what we're going to have to be. Because the idea of saying we're never going to be the 51st state, of saying we're always going to be the true north, strong and free, means that we are going to have to stand up for our values as Canadians, which is being inclusive, being positive on the world stage, trying to bring people together and be that peacekeeper. But at the same time, we have to put food on the table. We have to help everybody who's worried about the cost of living and everybody who's dealing with the pain of the grocery prices that we're seeing right now. And so I think that, Mr. Carney had a very strong moment on the international stage with his speech in Davos, being at the hockey rink. Everybody saw that speech and they were proud of our prime minister that I've spoken to so far. So I think we're showing that we can take that stand, we can articulate our values on the global stage. But now we also need to look after the cost of living, look after putting food on the table, look after protecting jobs. For us, we've been very clear. The Port of Churchill is our contribution to that. It's a mega project that allows Western Canadian resources to get to the European Union more quickly. It allows us even to get Western Canadian resources to the Western Indian refineries more quickly through the Suez Canal than you can from the Port of Vancouver. So not only that, you got a military installation, a military presence possible in Churchill. That's just one example. I think every region in Canada is bringing forward their mega projects, their economic diversification priorities. It's not going to be about picking one mega project or picking one region or one sector over the other. In order for us to be able to continue to be proud of our Canadian values, to continue to defend our freedom, we're going to have to do all of the above. We're going to have to build so many of these projects. We're going to have to pursue enhanced trade with so many different markets around the world. And yes, we are going to have to be cognizant and aware of the fact that as we head into the review of CUSMA, the American government is going to keep pushing to try and push Canadians onto the back foot, so that we negotiate from a position of weakness. But again, we can be strategic. We can negotiate from the front foot. We can advance our own interests in the CUSMA review, but we have to stick together in order for us to do so. If we're divided against ourselves, it's not going to work. And so we got to keep working together.
Pardon me, I just have 30 seconds left, and I wanted to ask you in that vein about the meeting between premiers the next day, joined by the Prime Minister in person here in Ottawa this week. There has been a lot less of that unity in some respects on certain files over the past few months. Do you anticipate a change? Do you anticipate that the unity you talk about will be a focus at this meeting?
I disagree. I think the unity is very strong across the different regions of the country. And what I would say is this, and this is a very Canadian thing, we don't have to agree on everything in order to do the big things together. So Premier Ford and I, we're going to have our back and forth about canola and EVs. We're going to have our back and forth about Crown Royal. But at the end of the day, neither one of us is ever going to doubt the other's patriotism. We're never going to doubt another premier's commitment to this country. And on that level, we're going to work together. So yeah, we're going to have tough conversations, interesting conversations from time to time. But I think there is no debate around the Premier's table and the First Minister's table that every single one of us is a proud Canadian and is going to do what it takes to ensure that our country's freedom and that the people in this country can put food on the table for generations to come.
I'll leave it on that note. We look forward to seeing you here in Ottawa this week. Premier, thanks for your time today.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Appreciate it. That's Manitoba Premier Wab Kinew. Coming up on Question Period, more coverage of our top stories with the Sunday strategy session. Kathleen Monk, James Moore, and Scott Reid are with me next. Stay right there.
With our economy under threat from abroad, Canadians have made a choice to focus on what we can control. You are choosing to put your hard-earned dollars behind Canadian businesses and Canadian workers. Canada's new government is doing the same with our new Buy Canadian policy. We're on a mission to build big, from millions of homes that will improve affordability, to major projects that will transform our economy, to the new military hardware that will protect Canadians and our sovereignty.
That's a clip from a video released on Prime Minister Mark Carney's social media channels yesterday morning. It was posted not long after U.S. President Donald Trump launched a new tariff threat against Canada, in which he referred to Carney as, quote, governor, the first time he's done so with this prime minister. So what are the political implications of Trump's latest threat, particularly ahead of the return of the House of Commons tomorrow? Here to weigh in is our Sunday strategy session. Kathleen Monk is former director of communications to the late Jack Layton. James Moore is a former Conservative cabinet minister. And Scott Reid is former communications director to Prime Minister Paul Martin. Hi, everybody. Good to see you on this Sunday. I appreciate you making the time. Scott, I'll start with you. The Prime Minister stopped to talk to reporters today, didn't engage too much on any communications with Trump, just kind of downplayed actually how significant whatever happened with China was. What does that tell you, and how big of a deal do you think this is politically for him?
Well, it's significant, but I thought the Prime Minister's tone was bang on and appropriate, because Donald Trump is a presidential equivalent of a metal spoon in the microwave these days. He's sparking and lighting up all over the place. It's not just Canada. He unloaded 72 social postings. So he's lashing out at everyone. We have to take serious his posting and his suggestion that he may oppose a 100% across-the-board tariffs, but I'm not sure that it is a serious threat. And in that context, taking a bit of time, pointing out that Canada is not negotiating a free trade agreement with China, as Minister LeBlanc did, pointing out, as the Prime Minister did, that there would be severe downsides to Donald Trump actually taking that kind of action. Imagine the increase in the price of gas at the pump for Americans. So taking a breath, not panicking, just being steady and sensible seems to me to be the right play at this moment, particularly as you look at the broader context with how Donald Trump is conducting himself, the isolation he's experiencing internationally, and the divisions he's provoking domestically.
Yeah, it's interesting because on the face of it, when you see a threat like that from a U.S. president, James, to Scott's point, you have to take it seriously. At the same time, we're just a few months, a few weeks out from the last tariff threat of an additional 10% that Trump levied against us, which was supposed to come because of that Ronald Reagan ad, and then was never spoken of again.
An important point that you just made. Donald Trump has threatened 3 times more tariffs than he's actually ever imposed. So the keep calm, carry on prose of the Prime Minister is the appropriate response. You can't react to everything Donald Trump says and does, but you do have to respond as a nation. And the Prime Minister obviously had a very good moment in Davos, to the point where you have Pierre Poilievre, for the first time, I think, ever, praising a sitting Liberal Prime Minister, because Pierre Poilievre recognizes the moment, and the Prime Minister seems to recognize the moment coming out of his cabinet retreat, that it's time to pivot and move forward and not be disappointed, be internally angry, be publicly stoic. And then when Parliament comes back, and as we move forward, there's never been a bigger barn door open for the Prime Minister of this country, with a union of solidarity behind him that is nonpartisan, to go forward and do big things and be significant about that. The Super Bowl is around the corner, a couple weeks away. We're supposed to have these sort of installments of major projects across the country. There's a moment here for the Prime Minister to do something really significant and show Canadians that we are united and we're doing big things as a country.
It will be a really interesting, it feels like, Kathleen, return to Parliament tomorrow for exactly the reason that James lays out. The opportunity for the government is massive. To the point about Pierre Poilievre, there's a ton of rhetoric from the opposition, including the Conservatives, actually, at this moment, about advancing those priorities together, which is not something, to be honest, that on any side you normally hear ahead of a return to Parliament, at least not in the last little while.
And it speaks to the change in tone and what's needed, right? And that tone shift for the Conservatives is remarkable, that they're willing to cooperate, possibly do joint negotiations with the U.S. But what I found interesting from this morning and the Prime Minister was really the pushback that he got from one journalist. He got basically one question put to him this morning, and it was, have you mortgaged Canadians' affordability because you've angered Trump? And bringing it back to those key issues that Canadians care about how people are struggling day to day. And Wab Kinew said it best in your best last interview, which was just he's got to do all of the things at all the time, Prime Minister Carney. He's got to deal with the affordability threats, the political threats, and the electoral instability that the minority is, and then also deal with the geopolitical stuff. But I think what was fascinating is that he did say this morning, the Prime Minister, that there would be some affordability affordability measures coming soon. So what are they? Are they on the agenda? How does he deal with the Conservatives' pushback on affordability, immigration, crime? Can he solve those political challenges so if there is an election, the Liberals are poised to do better or at least answer that big question of affordability on the problem? We've seen them cut taxes in the past. Will they do more in the future?
Yeah, to what degree, Scott, do you think there needs to be like something tangible on that front? I know we're all consumed at this sort of esoteric level with everything going on with the United States and moral clarity and all those things, but like people are worried about the same thing they were worried about last year and the year before, a lack of affordability.
I'm not sure now's the exact moment where we need to just, stencil a check and send it to every household. I don't know that that's the appropriate response. I think giving voice to the concerns that people have, making certain that Canadians don't watch the Prime Minister, see how he's involved in these discussions, both internationally and across the border with Donald Trump, and worried that maybe the Prime Minister and the government have forgotten about the daily struggles that people are experiencing. You've got to make certain that you address that. You've got to make certain that you connect all of this instability that stems from Trump with the challenges that people are feeling and with your policy remedies. But I don't know that they need to do something in the immediate term, again, in a panicky way. And that really is not the recipe the Prime Minister tends to follow. I think more important than anything, we shouldn't underestimate the connection that Canadians themselves make between Donald Trump's erraticism and their own economic situation. I do think Canadians lay this at the feet of Donald Trump, and that's why it was smart of Pierre Poilievre to ignore all those conservatives who are jamming the pages of the National Post with numbskull commentary, trying to align themselves and say, actually Trump's right. That is not the play that Pierre Poilievre supported. He knows that that is electoral disaster, and instead saying we got to chart a similar course.
I've got 30 seconds left for both, 30 seconds for James and 30 seconds for Kathleen. James, what do you think about that?
I think that's exactly right. One of the reasons Donald Trump's domestic support is cratering is because he's talking about golden domes and Greenland and Nobel Prizes. The Prime Minister of this country and Pierre Poilievre, who aspires to be the Prime Minister of this country, needs to focus on the things that Canadians care about and not get sidetracked. The difference between us and the United States is that the cost of living crisis, if you're an auto worker, Donald Trump is your cost of living crisis because he's threatening your job. So these two things are not actually mutually exclusive. They're combined. If you farm canola on the prairies, access to that Chinese market is a job issue and it is a cost of living issue. So focus on the horizon. Keep selling products to the world. Don't get bullied by Donald Trump. Canada first. That should be the ethos for everybody.
I'll crystallize it in one line. Americans are watching as President Trump chooses to kidnap and kill his own citizens as opposed to lowering prices. Canadians are watching that in horror and want our government to chart a new path and a new way forward.
Okay, I'm going to leave it there. Guys, thanks very much for making the time in the conversation. Kathleen Monk, Scott Reid, and James Moore, our Sunday strategy session. When we come back, Davos debut. Mark Carney drew a big international reaction for his first speech to the World Economic Forum as Prime Minister this week as he appealed to other middle powers to work together. Coming up next, I'm going to speak with former Australian Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull about just that.
But more recently, great powers have begun using economic integration as weapons. Tariffs as leverage, financial infrastructure as coercion, supply chains as vulnerabilities to be exploited. You cannot live within the lie of mutual benefit through integration when integration becomes the source of your subordination.
Canada gets a lot of freebies from us, by the way. They should be grateful also, but they're not. I watched your Prime Minister yesterday. He wasn't so grateful. But they should be grateful to us. Canada lives because of the United States. Remember that, Mark, the next time you make your statements.
Prime Minister Mark Carney's debut speech to the World Economic Forum as Prime Minister drew a rare standing ovation and the attention of U.S. President Donald Trump. In a 17-minute address on Tuesday, the Prime Minister asserted the old world order is over, called out global hegemonies, and urged middle powers to work together to counter abuse from great powers. I spoke to former Australian Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull just after Carney's speech in Davos. Have a listen to our conversation. Hi, Mr. Turnbull. Pleasure to welcome you back to the program. Very nice to see you. Thank you for making the time.
Great to be with you.
I was listening to our Prime Minister's speech at Davos, and some of what he said reminded me of something you had written a number of months ago. And one line in particular stood out to me when he said, Nostalgia, and this garnered a lot of reaction. Nostalgia is not a strategy. You had written, hope is a dangerous comforter in times like these. Why is that the case, do you think?
Well, for exactly the same reason, really. I mean, can I say Mark Carney's speech was superb? It was the most important speech given since Trump became president the second time. And really, I hope everybody watches it and reads it several times. Look, the point is, what Mark is saying there is that, is exactly the same point I was making, which is that we can't just hope that the old times will come back again, that this is just a blip. That was what people were reassuring themselves with during Trump's first term, and I guess they felt vindicated because of Biden's election. But when you look at the United States now, there have been some very big changes in their political system. The Republican Party is dominated by the MAGA movement, dominated by Trump. I don't think we can assume that this is a change, a bit of volatility. As Carney said, this is a disruption, and we've got to learn to live with that.
What are the implications of this being something more permanent than a lot of people would like to hope?
Well, I think it's exactly what Mark Carney says. The middle powers have got to work together. There's no point getting into bilateral negotiations with the United States if you can avoid it, because you're always going to be dealing with somebody so much more powerful than you. You've got to be very wary about integration and dependency. One of the big mistakes my country has made in recent years is to become even more dependent on the US from a defence point of view, right at the time when the US is becoming less dependable. And again, that's not a bug, that's a feature of the new dispensation in America. So more self-reliant, working with other middle powers, and accepting the world as it is. As Mark Carney says, nostalgia or hope, same point, is not a strategy.
Did you denote any kind of evolution in the degree to which middle powers, are willing to do so around the Greenland issue? I think there were some comments even from, for example, California Governor Gavin Newsom about how a lot of European leaders had chosen to try and diffuse situations with Trump, to try and make good to do good as far as they could. But around Greenland, everyone seemed to actually take a position in contrast to Trump, which ultimately appears, to some degree at least, to have worked. What is your assessment of how that evolved?
Well, I think the bottom line is this. My view, and based on my experience of dealing with Trump in his first term, is that, like most bullies, possibly all bullies, if you give in to them and suck up to them, you just end up getting more bullied. Right? So I think the Europeans made a massive mistake in rolling over in such a compliant way on trade. You remember that excruciating press conference at Trump's golf resort in Scotland when Ursula von der Leyen was, trying to make it sound as though this was a good deal for Europe, where in fact it was a massive capitulation. I think the Europeans have woken up now. I think Canada's leadership has been absolutely critical, and Canadians should take a great deal of credit for this. And when standing up to Trump over Greenland has meant that he has had to back down, right? So he is, he is a classic bully. And I'm not saying this, not trying to be critical of him. This is like saying the Pope's a Catholic. He is a bully. That's his whole technique. He wrote a book about it. Mm-hmm. And so if you want to get a decent outcome with Trump, you have got to be prepared to stand your ground.
Why do you think the first instinct for so many countries was to capitulate? And were you surprised by it?
I was really surprised that they did it again. You'd think everyone would have learnt the lesson from the first term, but you get I think it's, I don't know, people naturally want to suck up and please and flatter and ingratiate. And, you can go through all the courtesies and you can, have backslapping and, talk about all the wonderful history that your two countries have had. You can do all of that. But when it gets down to the hard yards, generally behind closed doors, you've got to stand your ground. And Carney is absolutely right when he says the United States under Trump is treating integration as an opportunity for exploitation, right? So Canada, of course, is the greatest example of this. Your economy was more and more integrated with that of the United States. That was a mutual policy decisions from both sides of the border. You had a free trade agreement and so forth. Trump has used that as leverage against you. And he is boasting as an achievement of his that Canadian auto plants are closing and in effect moving across the border to the United States. So he is regarding it as an achievement that Canadian workers are getting laid off, apparently, so he claims, new opportunities for American workers. So this is a completely different world. And that's why Carney is right. I mean, he says the first thing you've got to do in confronting this is to be honest about it and stop fooling yourself. It's a very eloquent speech. I really think it's one of the most significant speeches, certainly given since Trump became leader the second time. It may prove to be one of the most important political speeches, in our lifetimes. Really outstanding.
In a best case scenario, how is what the Prime Minister here said internalized by other middle powers, do you think?
Well, I think what he's been able to do, and this is a tribute to his intellect and his eloquence, he's been able to frame it in a very persuasive, considered way and deliver it in a way that I think has brought together, so if you like, crystallized, dawning reality. I mean, in a way, my experience was a bit like Carney's. My relationship with Trump in his first term began with an almighty row. I didn't seek it, but, he wanted to renege on a deal I'd done with his predecessor, and, we had a big row about it, and I held him to his word. And that was good, because then our relationship worked well, because he respected me. Now, I think Canada's position was Trump's approach to your country was so adversarial. Carney ran on a platform of standing up to Trump. He then stood up to Trump. And so that set him up well with Trump, and Trump respects him. And I think his success is seen has been taken up as an example. Now, so this is not to say that Trump can't continue to do damage to Canada or indeed other countries, but the madness of this, Vassy, is that, the countries that Trump is putting pressure on are America's closest allies. It is the members of NATO. It is Canada. I mean, it's unbelievable. And, a lot of people are struggling to come to terms with it. But I think it's important, as Carney says, to be really honest about it.
I think part of that honesty is, and you point to it, like there is real economic damage. There is real damage being done, if you take Canada as a case example, through the integration that our economy has with the United States, but we're certainly not the only ones. The realistic part of this is that if we do what the Prime Minister laid out as middle powers, there will still be a lot of pain in the interim. Do you think those middle powers have the fortitude to withstand that?
Well, look, yes, I believe so. And Trump will try to pick them off one by one, of course. But let me give you an example. And again, Carney referred to it. In my time as PM, we had the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which, as you know, is a big project of the Obama administration. Trump becomes president, pulls out of it. Most people thought the deal was dead. I persuaded Shinzo Abe, then the PM of Japan, that we should keep going with it. And then we persuaded other countries, including Canada, although Canada was in and out a couple of times. But we finally got all the other members of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, other than the US, to stick with it. And so that is a big, ambitious regional trade deal. And as Carney noted, and as President Macron spoke, and I want to pay credit to him, he's been very eloquent and strong on exactly this theme himself. The European Union is now working towards having a closer tie with the Trans-Pacific Partnership. The UK has already joined it. And so middle powers who do not need to have leadership from the United States or from China. They can do things together. And when we say they're middle powers, I mean, Canada is a huge economy, Australia is a big economy, Japan is a gigantic economy. So, and the European Union is, depending on how you do the sums, either the second or the third biggest economy in the world. So the bottom line is we do have agency, but we have to work together.
I'll leave it on that note. Thank you, Mr. Turnbull. Pleasure to see you as always. Appreciate your insights.
Okay, Vassy, thank you very much.
Coming up, keeping up with the Conservatives. The House of Commons returns tomorrow after a 6-week winter break as the Tories gear up for their national convention later this week. Leader Pierre Poilievre is set to face a confidence vote, his first since taking the helm of the party in 2022. Pollsters David Coletto and Shachi Kurl will be here together on the other end of a short break to look ahead to that vote.
Prime Minister Carney's well-crafted and eloquently delivered speech at Davos has been widely noted, and I want to start by offering my own praise. What stood out most to me was when he pointed out, quote, the gaps between rhetoric and reality. That's especially true here at home. If liberal words and good intentions were tradable commodities, Canada would already be the richest nation on earth.
Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre there responding to the Prime Minister's Davos speech in that clip. He's set to face the biggest test yet to his leadership this week. Party members will decide on Friday whether Poilievre stays or goes as leader. How will he fare at the convention vote in Calgary? I spoke with Shachi Kurl, president of the Angus Reid Institute, and Abacus Data's CEO David Coletto a little earlier. Hi, Shachi. Hi, David. Thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate you making the time.
Hey there.
Vassy.
Shachi, I'll start with you. Before we get into the sort of mechanics of the party itself and Conservative supporters, top line numbers, what are you seeing in the electorate right now for the Conservatives versus the Liberals and Poilievre versus Carney?
So right now, I mean, the Conservatives, and we'll have new numbers early next week, but, they are holding their own within a couple of points of the Liberals, sometimes a statistical tie. So, when we talk about the challenges for Pierre Poilievre, certainly Conservatives will push back and point out, well, if we were doing so badly, why are we in very good competitive situation with the Liberals? But that doesn't account for the fact that it's still not enough mathematically in terms of percentage of popular vote or the number of seats they return to Parliament to be in a position to form a majority, and that anybody but conservative sentiment continues to prevail. In the era of Donald Trump, you will find Bloc voters, NDP voters, even Green voters who may hold their noses and vote for the Liberals because the narrative or the perception of Poilievre, sort of being too close to that right-wing side of politics, too close to Trumpian politics, has been just absolutely toxic for him. It's been kryptonite. And you also start to see, Vassy, some wobbles and some doubts among past Conservative voters. So when we talk to people who voted Conservative just about a year ago in that 2025 spring election, only about 60% of those voters, and important distinction, those aren't paid-up Conservative Party members, they're people who voted, who now say only about 58%, 60% basically say Poilievre should stay. About a quarter of them think he should go. So that is the concern, in terms of the broad electorate. What the party thinks of him, what his true faithful grassroots members think of him, obviously another story.
And David, you've done a deep dive into those numbers as well. How would you explain sort of the different factions that make up a Poilievre supporter base?
Yeah, well, I think if you look at what we call the conservative base, right? Those would be people who say, I'm not going to vote for any other party. It's conservative or nothing. They represent about 1 in 4 Canadians. So it's a substantial number that make up its base. It's always had that. It's always had the advantage of a really high floor, and it's larger than the Liberals or the New Democrats or any other party. But the problem is, as Shachi just highlighted, the ceiling is also quite low. But if you look at those who are in that base, not only do they really like Pierre Poilievre, in fact, they tell us they trust him far more than they do even Stephen Harper or Doug Ford or Danielle Smith, but they actually think overwhelmingly that he makes the party more electable, right? And so that's, I think, a really important point about his relationship with that base. They agree with him in not just his tone. They want more confrontation. They think the system is rigged against them. They think, you know, the media is not reporting anything fairly. They have deep suspicions around a lot of public institutions. And yet, almost every other Canadian disagrees with that perspective. And that's the paradox facing Poilievre's leadership, in that at once he is likely going to do very, very well next weekend. But at the same time, the more that people learn that, the more they might be off-putting, for the exact reason that Shachi said at the beginning around the connection with Trump.
There's this weird thing sometimes in politics, and the three of us have talked about this before, but Shachi, where something feels really inevitable or really certain, and then all of a sudden it isn't. And I've covered lots of stuff like that, and I feel like it's almost impossible for Mr. Poilievre not to do well in this leadership review, given the support, as David mentions, he does have among the base of the party. Is there a world in which that's not going to happen? Like, what do you think is going to happen?
My God, it would be breathtaking, right? Like, it would be a jaw-dropping moment if we didn't see what the political class, or however we want to describe ourselves, view as him not receiving a threshold high enough to continue. Because we have to remember, this is, as David's pointed out, Poilievre's party. The guy won the leadership with what, like 90% of the vote? So you would have to see a tremendous amount of defection from, you know, a near unanimous endorsement from him when he took the leadership. And when we've asked Conservatives in the past to kind of debrief and reflect on what went wrong in the last election, you know, who do you blame? Conservative voters at that time, and those diehards that David was talking about, but even those who cast a let's call it a warm or a friendly vote, if not you know, till a death do us part loyalty vote, they didn't blame Poilievre. They blamed Trump. They blamed Carney. They blamed circumstances. But they didn't blame the leader's approach in that last campaign, which arguably cost him the election. So to see a level of defection that really calls his leadership into question, I do think would be, you know, we can all doubt ourselves and, you know, talk to me in the wee hours, I guess, over the weekend morning to find out where things are at. But it would be, I think, a really gobsmacking moment if he didn't have it. The other piece of it is, at least publicly, and yes, there have been floor crossings, and yes, there have been sotto voce grumblings about, you know, from within Conservative ranks, but you don't right now see an alternative. And I find that, you know, for people to defect or to go somewhere else, it's not just should Poilievre stay or go? It's what's my alternative? And that alternative piece you're not seeing or hearing within the ranks of the party or the caucus.
It feels like a very unique situation, David, in that, and I could be misinterpreting this, but in that, like, I do feel as though Mr. Poilievre's leadership of the party has taken the base in the size of the scope of the level of support for the party to new heights. At the same time, among the rest of the electorate, it does feel like that same leadership that is such a benefit to the party in some ways is a real detriment in others.
It is, and let's be clear. Historically, that's been a problem for Conservative, particularly at the national level, Conservative leaders, right, who have always had a difficult time expanding beyond a certain number. Even Stephen Harper did. There was you know, he hit 41 and he could not break past that when he won his majority. The problem is that in the current context, where we have more or less a 2.5 party system with the Bloc in Quebec, but really two parties outside of it, means that's not enough. It's not enough to have assembled a coalition that's larger maybe than you've ever been able to do, as long as, one, you've got a stronger Liberal Party, and two, that Poilievre is so off-putting to so many more people that you may be inclined to vote NDP or Green or Bloc, but you're going to actually say, you know what? No way. I'm going to go and vote Liberal just to stop this guy. And so that's the fundamental problem. And I agree. I'm not sure there's someone who at once can both speak to the base of the party and also grow it, right? I don't believe that if Jean Charest was leader of the Conservative Party today, that one, they would have won the last election, or two, that they'd be in any stronger position, because about a quarter of the Conservative base would look at Mr. Charest and say, you're the exact problem that I want to see blown up and seen broken down and seen changed. And so this is the challenge that I think is not going to go away if you replace Pierre Poilievre. It's going to continue because of what I call the opinion architecture of the Conservative movement in Canada right now.
I'm going to have to leave it on that note. Guys, thanks for the analysis. Great to see you both. Appreciate it. Shachi, Kurl, and David Coletto. I have to take a short commercial break, but we've got more question period on the other end of that break. Stay right there. Welcome back to Question Period. There is a lot we're looking ahead to this week, including the first interest rate announcement from the Bank of Canada of the year. That's coming down on Wednesday, and then some pretty big political events, starting with the return of the House of Commons tomorrow. We're going to be live from Parliament Hill interviewing Government House Leader Steve McKinnon about the government's legislative priorities in this winter sitting, and we'll also have reaction from members of the opposition. And then, as the week draws to a close, we're going to head to Calgary for some special coverage of the Conservative Convention. We're going to be live from Calgary on Thursday and Friday with special editions of Power Play. And then on Friday, when the leadership vote actually happens, just prior to that vote taking place, the leader, Pierre Poilievre of the party, will address party delegates. We're going to carry that live with some special coverage on CTV News. We'll be anchoring that. And then also on Saturday, when the results start to come out, that may happen overnight Friday as well. But we're going to have special coverage of that too. So all of that happening in Calgary. I'm going to leave Question Period there. I'm Vassy Kapelos. Thank you so much for watching. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow night live from Parliament Hill on Power Play. Have a wonderful rest of your day.